The mental state is a harder topic to explain, but it's the foundational one for this whole lesson, so it's important that we start with it. The mental states are a way that you can change the activity of your mind considering the context and the situation that you are in. Most of the problems of many people in interactions is that they are using an inadequate mental state for the situation that they are in. For example, they can be studying with a dull and passive mind, or they are interacting with others with a very introverted mind, to name just two situations. We need to learn how to handle our mind in these kind of situations through what we call at Charisma School mental states. The rule of thumb here is that a powerful, active mental state will always overrun a passive mental state. The easier way is explaining this through this example. Let's say that you are in your normal everyday living, probably in a train going to work, minding your own business, so to speak, which means that mostly you are not present. You are, just letting your mind roam free. Thoughts are coming in and going without no control on your part. This is a mental state of passivity. You have little control over it. You may think that you're having some control, but in fact, you aren't. You aren't focused on anything in particular. Thoughts are just coming and going. Now, let's say that you have an important presentation at work. If you allow this mental passivity to continue, what happens is that the anxiety will probably grow more and more since you are allowing your mind to take over. So it will start to create all kinds of bad scenarios and bad feelings. I'm pretty sure you know what I'm talking about. Even when you try to take over your thoughts and try to think positively, it never quite works out. Why? Because you're still in that mental state of passivity. But you are just discussing and trying to change your mind in that state of mental passivity, of inaction. Of course, your efforts to change your inner voice won't work. When you are still in that passive state, the efforts will be futile. Now, enter a state of mental activity. The term mental activity here is used in a different way than the regular term. You normally use mental activity to talk about random thoughts that you are having in your mind. In here, I'm using a different meaning. With mental activity, you wake up from this kind of trance that you were in. It's like you get a slap in the face. It's a more powerful state than the one you had before. And as our rule of thumb says, a more powerful state will always overrun a weaker state. It's a vigilant and active state where you control your own thoughts by using the inner voice technique to replace negative thoughts with positive and more powerful ones. If you try to change your inner voice in this state of mental passivity, you'll fail. If you really need to change your state to this powerful, active one. It's a completely different state of mind where you regain control of what's happening. This is the kind of state that you hear in Buddhist trainings for taming the mind, a present and active mental state that you can control your mind and thoughts. By repeatedly training this mental state towards years and decades, they achieve a purer state of mind. Don't think for 1 second that the meditation masters and monks you meet and hear about had a different mind than you or me. No, they had the exact same dirty, negative, bad thoughts than all of us. But through a training of perpetual changing their mental state, and through it, their thoughts, they achieve a purer state of mind. Yes, they use meditation as well, but meditation is only another technique. If a Buddhist doesn't keep this vigilant and active mental state in his day-to-day life to avoid negative thoughts and actions, then decades of meditation won't help him. And it's very common to hear people, well, mostly Westerners, saying that they have been meditating for, 10 years, yet they say nothing has changed. Why? Because if your mind is only active and vigilant in that hour of the day that you spend meditating, but it's in a state of mental passivity in the remaining 23 hours of the day, then what real change can that bring? The true secret is keeping this mental state until when it's needed. If you let your guard down, the mental passivity with negative thoughts and actions will come crawling back in. So coming back to our example, or when you are on your way to work for that important presentation, what you want to do in that train is completely change your mental state. Like you are having a mental slap to wake you up from passivity and then change your thoughts to a positive, powerful thoughts. And you keep this attitude all the way to work in your presentation. This doesn't mean that your presentation will go excellently and that you won't fail, since it naturally depends on other factors like your preparation, your content, your delivery skills, but it sure improves your odds. The more you can keep this vigilant, active mental state on your day-to-day life, the better for you in all walks of life, and particularly in seduction, as I'll describe in the next few videos. Remember that it's very important that you understand this concept of active state and passive state, and that you can actually identify it during your day and be able to use it. Later on, that is going to get a little bit more complex, since active and passive mental state is a very reductionist way of looking at it. But for now, it's important that you become aware of it and constantly change your mental passivity to mental activity. In the exercise protocol section, you'll understand this better with specific exercises. So wake up from your mental passivity and become active. Let's complicate things just a little bit. We can talk a whole deal about mental states because, as you can imagine, it's not that black or white. It's not just active or passive mental states. There are a whole lot of shades of gray in between. But for our purposes of sexual magnetism, it's not necessary to go deep into mental states in general. We just need one more distinction, but I'm going to place it in the context with the active and passive that you learned in the previous video. So you have an active mental state and a passive mental state. But this mental state can be internal or external. What do I mean by this? Well, you can be active or passive completely inside your mind, like daydreaming, or outside of your mind, like in an interaction or watching a movie. Just look at the mental state chart over here. On the bottom left, we have a passive internal mental state, which means that you are completely passive, just letting your mind roam free, and internally, which means that you are inside your own mind. So little or no input from the outside. This happens, for example, when you are daydreaming. Did it ever happen to you when you are driving in the highway, not remembering the last few miles that you did? Well, that's because you are daydreaming. You maintain just the bare amount of external input so that you don't crash, but you are in fact completely inside your own mind. Not even in an active state, just passively roaming free. Or when you were in some boring lecture and your mind was roaming free into some thinking. On the top left, we have passive external mental state, which means that you are completely passive, just letting your mind roam free, but since it's external, you are outside of your mind. Just when you are watching a movie or a theater or some conversation that you aren't participating or actively thinking about the issues being discussed. Think about it. When you are watching a movie and are inside the movie, you are continuing with a passive attitude, meaning you aren't controlling your thoughts or states, the movie is. If there's a sad scene, you cry. A scary scene, you become scared. You are passively on the wheel of the movie, so to speak. Now, on the bottom right side, we have the active internal mental state, which is the kind of state that you are in when you are studying a particular subject or you are involved in deep thinking. It's completely active because if you are doing it correctly, of course, you are putting your full focus and attention in your subject. Well, it's a common state among academics and philosophers evolved into deep thinking. By the way, deep thinking itself is an issue that could involve a whole course by itself. But on this mental state, there is little or no exterior input. Just maybe a book or a block of notes. But if you're involved into deep thinking or deep studying, you aren't really reading the book as if you are reading a novel, which would have been a passive external state. But you are actively thinking about it, about what you are reading, and thus it makes it an active internal state. And finally, we have the active external mental state. This is the ideal state for seduction and why I'm saving it for last. This is the state, or when you are actively involved in some conversation, for example. You need to have a very active state of mind to direct your thinking, words, and attitude into whatever you want, but you're also external since you're having an interactions and you need direct input from the outside world, or in this case, the other person or the persons around you. None of these mental states are completely good or bad. As many studies, especially in creativity, in demonstrating, daydreaming is a good thing to let your creative juice flowing. But if you are daydreaming while you are talking to seduce someone, probably it's not going to work out very well for you. And I enjoy passively watching a good movie just like anyone else. But this state doesn't work in conversation with someone or in a group. If you are in the external passive state when you are out with someone, well, you just tend to be left on the sidelines of what is happening. Or if you are in an active internal state while you are talking, you'll tend to be, in very deep and thorough, but not attentive to the other person in front of you. You just talk about the things that you are thinking deep about without any regard to the feelings of the other person. It's all about the way that you use them. That's why becoming aware of your mental states in different kind of situations is really imperative. The main problem with mental states is that we tend to have a default mode of mental state. While we should use them differently in several kinds of situations, we tend to have a default way of acting. We constantly use a distinct mode of mental state because that is comfortable, and that is a comfortable one for us. Then we ask for ourselves, why you are always a part of conversation or groups, or why always women find you very interesting but no attraction ever happens? Well, if you continue to have an active state but very internally, then it's not going to help you to connect with anyone on the outside world, be it on a business meeting or on a date. And this is the way it is until you learn how to consciously change, and this is what we're really going to learn on this session. The last distinction that I'm going to do about mental states at this point is the different levels. A mental state is not an on and off switch. You aren't always 100% internal and active or 100% passive and external. Not at all. It's not a switch that you turn on. That's why you notice that you are more active or more passive, but you notice in different degrees. When you are active, sometimes you aren't always completely on, although it's still an active state. It can have different degrees. Same thing with all the other mental states. Think about it more like a volume lever that you can go a bit up and a bit down. It's not on and off. No, it's different levels. Although you are active, you aren't always in your maximum active mode. Sometimes it just won't work as well. That's why it's important to know the conditions under which you can be at your best on each mental state. For example, I function much better in the morning than at night. I can be at a maximum active external or internal mode in the morning, while at night, although I can easily become active, it's not on the same level as it is in the morning. On another example, it's much easier to be enjoying a good movie when all your tasks are done, no work left to do, and you can just turn off your mind during those 2 hours and enjoy the movie. While if you still have a to-do list as big as a bridge before you watch the movie, most likely turning from active to passive mode will be much harder. Knowing how to leverage this mental state is a good set of skills for maximum performance. Why does all this talk about mental states interest you? Why is that it's important for your goal of increasing your sexual energy? Well, several reasons that I'll explain. When you become aware of your mental states, you realize your default mental state, and maybe that default mental state is not the most appropriate one for a whole different kind of situations, especially the one that interests us in seduction. With the exercises that follow, you'll train yourself to switch between them and use the most suitable one for the work at hand. Maybe you realize that you are using them perfectly when you need to and switching among them as the need arises, and that's great. This means that your work with mental states will be far less. Still, I advise you to go over the exercises, although most likely you are doing this unconsciously. Creating the conscious awareness of mental states in you can help you in further optimizing them. This also helps you in keeping an active mental state more times than a passive one, which is very hindering to your development and energy overall. Many of the teenagers from this internet era are constantly in a passive mental state regardless of the situation. This is what an addiction to video games, television, or the internet will bring you. When you receive constant stimulus from television or video games, or even the culture of content consumption from the internet without any kind of deep thinking over what you are reading or watching, we turn into passive mode instantly. Television, mindless browsing, video games, these are the usual suspects for passive mode. If a big part of your day is ruled by passive mental state, then our normal mode of functioning will most likely be it. And the worst part is that most of these individuals never even realize that they are in the passive state most of the time, so life pretty much passes them by. This is a feeling of apathy and inaction on day-to-day life. While the passive state is useful in some situations, it can't be the dominant state most of your day. If this is happening, you require urgent change. It should be more like 90% active and 10% passive. The other downside of the passive state is that the anxieties and fears are allowed to run free since you don't have the necessary inner power to turn them off. When you let your negative inner voice dominate your passive state, this is where depression kicks in. Many times in a passive state, you are just allowing your fears and anxieties to dominate you. It's not by change that all the major religion advises you to keep your mind vigilant and active at all times, in the present moment and always aware. By this way, you can stop the negative thoughts and anxieties before they even start. Awareness in the present moment are key concepts in most of the world's religions. This inner power, confidence, and attitude always require an active mental state. The same way with the full use of your sexual energy. You need to keep active to let your sexual magnetism circulate correctly instead of blocking it. In the passive state, you can never cultivate it correctly. There will be more details on this on the sexual magnetism section. In short, knowing how to leverage the mental states can be a big booster for an optimized functioning in the world and, most importantly, for our current purposes. An important skill to improve your interactions and use of all remaining things we are going to learn in this course. It's not by accident that we are discussing mental states as our first skill, because to really get and successfully use all the other techniques, you need to leverage the mental states. You need to turn yourself from passive to active when you need to, and from internal to external on most interactions. But also be able to turn active internal for some deep work to be done. Now, let's move on to the mental states protocol so you can understand exactly how you can switch between them.